Namaste, this is Santa Auntie. Today we are going to conjugate the verb to read in 4 different tenses. We're going to conjugate in present tense, present continuous, future, and past. What does conjugate mean? This is a fancy word that means to give different forms. For example, this astronaut is taking different forms. Sometimes this astronaut is reaching for the stars. Sometimes he dabs on his rocket ship, and other times he just wants a quiet place on a planet to read his favorite book. When we talk about conjugating a verb, it means how the verb will change based on who is doing the action. For example, I read for a female, or I read for a male, or you read, he reads, she reads, we read, and they read. For each of these, in Hindi, the verb will change, and that changing of the verb is called conjugation. As I said, we're going to conjugate the verb in 4 tenses. We're starting with present tense. Present tense is also sometimes called the present habitual tense. Many people think that present tense is an action being done right now, but that's not what it is. It actually means an action that you do over and over. It's an action that happens frequently or repeatedly. For example, I play video games after school. Sher Raja is not playing right now, but it's something he does regularly. Or, he practices karate on Wednesdays. Lomari is not practicing right now, but it's something he does every Wednesday. And she reads every day. Again, the unicorn isn't reading right now, but it's something she does frequently. So again, present tense is an action that you do frequently or over and over. We are conjugating the verb to read. To read in Hindi is padhna, and padhna has a second meaning. It also means to study. We're going to conjugate the verb into these forms. I read for a girl, I read for a boy, or I should say male. You read, he reads, she reads, we read, and they read. So let's start conjugating with I read, and it's a female speaker. So it would be मैं पढ़ती हूँ. So see how we changed the verb? It went from पढ़ना, the infinitive form of the verb, to पढ़ती. So that changing of the verb is called conjugation. Now let's do the same sentence but for a male. मैं पढ़ता हूँ. You read. आप पढ़ते हैं. He reads. वो पढ़ता है. She reads. वो पढ़ती है. We read. हम पढ़ते हैं. They read. वो पढ़ते हैं. And congratulations, you just conjugated a verb in present tense. I want to take a moment to talk about 2 words that we used in today's video so far. Vo and ve. So you actually haven't heard the word ve, but I'm going to explain what this is. These words actually mean he, she, they, and it. Technically, ve is the correct word to use. So these sentences would be ve padhta hai, ve padhti hai, and ve padhte hain. But in everyday conversational Hindi, most people say vo. So in my classes, I teach vo. Vo padhta hai, vo padhti hai, वो पढ़ते हैं. And now that you conjugated a verb in present tense, let's do them one more time. I read and it's for a male. What would it be? मैं पढ़ता हूँ. I read and it's for a female. मैं पढ़ती हूँ. You read. आप पढ़ते हैं. He reads. वो पढ़ता है. She reads. वो पढ़ती है. We read. हम पढ़ते हैं. They read. वो पढ़ते हैं. Now let's continue with present tense, but let's make the sentences a little more interesting. Let's add the words one story and every day. One story is ek kahani, and every day is har din. You can use the word har din or you can use roz. Maybe you've heard the word roz. They both mean every day. The difference is that har din is Hindi and roz is an Urdu word. But the Urdu word roz is used in everyday conversational Hindi. I use that word all the time. So whichever one you like, feel free to use. I'm going to be using har din. So we're going to conjugate the verb exactly how we did a few minutes ago. But now we're going to add the words ek kahani and har din. So for example, the first one will be, I read one story every day. And it's a girl saying it. I read one story every day. मैं हर दिन एक कहानी पढ़ती हूँ. मैं हर दिन एक कहानी पढ़ती हूँ. Look at the sentence structure. The details that we added, the adjectives and the noun that we just added, go in the middle of the sentence, and the verb got pushed to the end. That is the typical structure of a Hindi sentence. In English, we're accustomed to SOV, subject, verb, object. Excuse me, not SOV, SVO, subject, verb, object. In Hindi, it is SOV, subject, object, verb comes at the end. मैं हर दिन एक कहानी पढ़ती हूँ. Let's do the same sentence for a boy. I read one story every day. मैं हर दिन एक कहानी पढ़ता हूँ. मैं हर दिन एक कहानी पढ़ता हूँ. You read one story every day. आप हर दिन एक कहानी पढ़ते हैं. He reads one story every day. वो हर दिन एक कहानी पढ़ता है. She reads one story every day. वो हर दिन एक कहानी पढ़ती है. We read one story every day. हम हर दिन एक कहानी पढ़ते हैं. And they read one story every day. वो हर दिन एक कहानी पढ़ते हैं. Okay, great work on that. Now let's move on and talk about present continuous tense. Present continuous tense is an action being done right now. For example, I am playing video games. He's playing the games right now. Or he is practicing karate. He's practicing right now. And she is reading. She's reading right now. So again, present continuous tense is an action being done right now. And you can tell the difference between present tense and present continuous from the verb. Notice that all of the present continuous verbs have an ing at the end. That ing is a conjugation. By changing the form of the verb, it changes its meaning. To get a better sense of the difference between present and present continuous, let's look at them next to each other. In the first example, present tense would be, I play video games after school. And present continuous is, I am playing video games. In the first one, present tense is it's a habit, something that Sher Raja does sometimes or often. But in the second one, present continuous, he's playing right now. Let's look at the next one. He practices karate on Wednesdays. That's present tense. And present continuous is he is practicing karate. He's practicing right now. And the last one is she reads every day. That's present tense. And she is reading is something she's doing right now. Notice the ing at the end of the present continuous verbs. That conjugation tells us that it's an action happening right now. We're still conjugating the verb to read, also known as to study in Hindi. We are going to conjugate the verb into each of these sentences. I am reading for a female. I am reading for a male. You are reading. He is reading. She is reading. We are reading. And they are reading. I am reading for a male. मैं पढ़ रहा हूँ. I am reading for a female. मैं पढ़ रही हूँ. Notice now these conjugations are different than the conjugations that we had in present tense, which makes sense, right? We have to have different conjugations. Otherwise, how would we make sense of what we're talking about? So the raha, rahi, rahe are the equivalent of ing in English. You are reading. आप पढ़ रहे हैं. He is reading. वो पढ़ रहा है. She is reading. वो पढ़ रही है. We are reading. हम पढ़ रहे हैं. They are reading. वो पढ़ रहे हैं. And that is one whole verb in present continuous tense. Let's do them one more time. I am reading for a male. मैं पढ़ रहा हूँ. I am reading for a female. मैं पढ़ रही हूँ. You are reading. आप पढ़ रहे हैं. He is reading. वो पढ़ रहा है. She is reading. वो पढ़ रही है. We are reading. हम पढ़ रहे हैं. They are reading. वो पढ़ रहे हैं. Okay, now let's continue with present continuous tense, but let's make the sentences more interesting. We've already learned one story. Now let's add funny. One story is ek kahani, and funny is mazedar. And in this case, we're going to use one story to also mean a story. So we use the same words. One story, a story, same thing. So we're going to conjugate the verb exactly how we did a few minutes ago, but now we're going to add the words ek kahani and mazedar to each of these. So for example, the first one will be, I am reading a funny story. So here we are. I am reading a funny story, and the speaker is a female. मैं एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ रही हूँ. And again, take a look at the sentence structure. The kahani and the funny, the adjective and the noun, are in the middle of the sentence, and our verb gets pushed out to the end. Again, in Hindi sentences, the verb appears at the very end of the sentence. मैं एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ रही हूँ. Do the same sentence for a male. मैं एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ रहा हूँ. You are reading a funny story. आप एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ रहे हैं. He is reading a funny story. वो एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ रहा है. She is reading a funny story. वो एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ रही है. We are reading a funny story. हम एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ रहे हैं. They are reading a funny story. वो एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ रहे हैं. Awesome job! Now let's move on to our third tense, future. Future tense is an action that may or may not happen in the future. For example, I will play video games. It's something that may or may not happen. He will practice karate. She will read. So again, future tense is an action that hasn't happened yet. If it does, it will happen in the future. And you can tell the difference in these verbs because of the word will. Again, by changing the form of the verb, it changes its meaning. We're still conjugating padna, which is to read or to study in Hindi. And now we're going to conjugate the verb into each of these sentences. I will read for a female. I will read for a male. You will read. He will read. She will read. We will read. And they will read. I will read for a male. मैं पढ़ूंगा. Same sentence for a female. मैं पढ़ूंगी. You will read. आप पढ़ेंगे. So let me stop here and draw your attention to the conjugations now. So we had, in present tense, our conjugations were ta, ti, and te. Present continuous, raha, rahi, rahe. And now, in future tense, we're introducing 5 new conjugations. So that's something different about future tense. This tense has 5 conjugations instead of 3. So you will read again, aap padhenge. He will read, wo padhega. She will read, wo padhegi. We will read, hum padhenge. They will read, wo padhenge. Awesome job! You successfully conjugated a verb in future tense. Let's do it again. I will read for a male. मैं पढ़ूंगा. Notice the conjugation, unga. I will read for a female. मैं पढ़ूंगी. Notice the conjugation, ungi. You will read. आप पढ़ेंगे. The conjugation, एंगे. He will read. वो पढ़ेगा. The conjugation, एगा. She will read. वो पढ़ेगी. The conjugation, एगी. We will read. हम पढ़ेंगे. So we're reusing this conjugation, एंगे. And they will read. वो पढ़ेंगे. Again, the conjugation is एंगे. Okay, now let's continue with future tense, but again, make the sentences more interesting by adding a story, which you know. So we're going to conjugate the verb exactly how we did a few minutes ago, but now we're going to add the words ek kahani. So for the first one, it would be, I will read a story, and the speaker is a female. I will read a story. मैं एक कहानी पढ़ूंगी. I will read a story for a male. मैं एक कहानी पढ़ूंगा. You will read a story. आप एक कहानी पढ़ेंगे. And at this point, you should be noticing the pattern with the verb pushed all the way to the end of the sentence. He will read. वो एक कहानी पढ़ेगा. She will read a story. वो एक कहानी पढ़ेगी. We will read a story. हम एक कहानी पढ़ेंगे. They will read a story. वो एक कहानी पढ़ेंगे. Okay, great work on future tense. At this point, we have done present tense, present continuous, and future. Now it's time for past tense. Past tense refers to actions that are completed, actions that happened and were completed before now, things that happened in the past. For example, I played video games. It's something that Mr. Sher did and now it's over. Or he practiced karate. He did it and now it's done. She read the book. She read it, she finished it. So again, past tense are actions that happened and were completed in the past. We're still conjugating padna, and we're going to conjugate into each of these sentences. I read for a female. I read male. You read. He read. She read. We read. And they read. So let's start conjugating with I read for a male. So I read is मैंने पढ़ा. मैंने पढ़ा. Same sentence for a female. मैंने पढ़ी. You read. आपने पढ़े. He read. उसने पढ़ा. She read. उसने पढ़ी. We read. हमने पढ़े. They read. उन्होंने पढ़े. And that is a conjugated verb in past tense. Great work. Let's do those again. I read for a male. मैंने पढ़ा. मैंने पढ़ी for a female. You read. आपने पढ़े. He read. उसने पढ़ा. She read. उसने पढ़ी. We read. हमने पढ़े. They read. उन्होंने पढ़े. Okay, it's time to add funny and the story. So like we've been doing, we're going to conjugate the verb exactly the same, but add ek kahani and mazedar. I read a funny story for a female. मैंने एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ी. Same sentence but for a male. मैंने एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ी. You read a funny story. आपने एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ी. He read a funny story. उसने एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ी. She read a funny story. उसने एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ी. We read a funny story. हमने एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ी. They read a funny story. उन्होंने एक मज़ेदार कहानी पढ़ी. Now, you might be wondering, why were all the conjugations just now identical? Why were they all पढ़ी? Now, this has to do with Hindi rules. In past tense, the conjugation is not necessarily dependent on the subject of the sentence. Instead, it is based on the direct object of the sentence. All of the practice sentences we did just now have a direct object, kahani. Kahani is a female noun. So the conjugation revolves around the fact that it's a female noun. So that's why all the conjugations were pari. Now let's look at a new verb where there is no direct object, and let's see how and if that changes things. We're going to conjugate to smile, muskurana. We're going to conjugate the verb to do these sentences. I smiled for a female. I smiled male. You smiled. He smiled. She smiled. We smiled. And they smiled. So, I smiled for a male. मैं मुस्कुराया. Same sentence, female. मैं मुस्कुराई. You smiled. आप मुस्कुराए. He smiled. वो मुस्कुराया. She smiled. वो मुस्कुराई. We smiled. हम मुस्कुराए. They smiled. उन्होंने मुस्कुराए. So as you can see in this verb, the conjugations revolved around the subject because there was no direct object. Another thing that changed were the conjugations themselves. For padna, the conjugations were pada, padi, and pade. For muskurana, the conjugations were muskuraya, muskurayi, and muskuraye. This has to do with Hindi noun rules and conjugation rules in past tense. And these rules don't apply to any of the other tenses we worked on today, only past tense. You might also be wondering why the subject pronouns were different. When we conjugated Bardna, these were the subject pronouns. Maine, apne, usne, humne, and unhone. But when we conjugated Muskurana, these were the subject pronouns. Main, aap, wo, hum, and wo. So why were they different? This has to do with more Hindi rules for past tense. The subject pronouns change based on whether the verb is transitive or intransitive. So wow, we did a lot today. We practiced conjugating in 4 different tenses. We added nouns and adjectives to create more interesting and complex sentences. We learned a bit about Hindi grammar. So excellent work. I hope you will use this video as a tool to keep practicing. Dhanyavad for joining me. I'll see you in class.